The harsh winter of 1887 showed no mercy to those who dared challenge it. In the remote reaches of the Dakota Territory, where civilization's comforts were mere whispers on the wind, a 53-year-old frontier nurse named Eleanor Blackwood found herself abandoned by the very people she had dedicated her life to helping. Cast aside as too old and a burden, she was left to face a merciless blizzard alone. But fate had other plans. When all hope seemed lost, an unexpected savior emerged from the swirling snow, a Lakota medicine man who would not only rescue her from certain death, but also initiate a remarkable journey of healing, understanding, and redemption that would forever change both their lives and the prejudiced community that had turned its back on her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The frontier settlement of White Ridge Creek sat nestled between rolling hills and vast plains, a collection of wooden structures that had sprouted from the wilderness through sheer human determination. For 15 years, Eleanor Blackwood had been its beating heart. As the settlement's only nurse, she had delivered babies into the world under lamplight, set broken bones after cattle drives gone wrong, and nursed countless settlers through fevers that would have otherwise claimed them. Her hands were weathered but steady, her blue eyes sharp despite the crow's feet that had deepened with each passing season. At 53, Eleanor moved with the slight stiffness of someone who had spent decades bending over sickbeds and trudging through snow to reach remote homesteads. Yet her mind remained as keen as the day she had arrived on the frontier, fresh from her training back east and brimming with idealism. She had come alone after her fiancé died in a factory accident, seeking purpose in a new life where her skills were desperately needed. "Mrs. Peterson, you need to keep drinking water," Eleanor instructed, placing a cool cloth on the forehead of a young mother who had fallen ill with a persistent fever. "The body needs water to fight sickness, just like a garden needs rain to grow." Outside the small cabin, snow had begun to fall, delicate flakes that gave no hint of the fury that would soon follow. Through the window, Eleanor could see children sliding on patches of ice, their laughter a welcome counterpoint to the worry that had settled in her chest. Martha Peterson's fever had not broken for 3 days. When the cabin door burst open, Eleanor startled. Thomas Wyatt, the settlement's self-appointed leader since the death of the previous mayor, stood in the doorway, snow dusting his broad shoulders and thick beard. "Nurse Blackwood," he said with cursory politeness, his eyes already moving past her to the woman on the bed. "How is she?" "Fighting," Eleanor replied. "The fever's stubborn, but Martha's stronger." Wyatt nodded, then cleared his throat. "The council met yesterday. We've decided it's time to send for a proper doctor from Riverford." Eleanor straightened, feeling a familiar tension creep up her spine. "A proper doctor?" "Riverford is a 3-day ride in good weather, which is why we've sent for him now, before winter truly sets in." Wyatt's tone was matter-of-fact, but Eleanor caught the slight hesitation before he continued. "The settlement's growing. We need someone younger, someone with formal education." The words hung in the air between them, sharp as icicles. Eleanor had heard the whispers, of course. Whispers that had started when she'd been too slow reaching the Miller boy when he fell from a horse last spring. Whispers that had grown louder when her hands had trembled while stitching up Logger Jenkins. "After a bar fight, I trained at Boston Medical College for Women," she said quietly, pride keeping her voice steady. "I've served this community faithfully for 15 years. Wyatt had the decency to look uncomfortable. "No one's questioning your dedication, Eleanor. But times are changing. The railroad's coming through next year. We'll have twice as many people by the next harvest. And you think I can't handle it because I'm too old?" The words tasted bitter. The council," Eleanor interrupted, "has never had to deliver twins in a blizzard or amputate a leg with nothing but whiskey for anesthesia." "I have," Martha moaned softly from the bed, breaking the tension. Eleanor immediately turned her attention back to her patient, adjusting the blankets and checking her pulse. When she looked up again, Wyatt was already halfway out the door. "The doctor from Riverford will be here within the week," he said without turning around. "The council will meet again to discuss your situation." The door closed behind him with a finality that sent a chill through Eleanor that had nothing to do with the draft. Over the next 3 days, the whispers became murmurs, and the murmurs became open discussion. Eleanor tried to ignore them as she made her rounds, checking on Mrs. Peterson, now recovering nicely, delivering medicine to old man Collins for his rheumatism, and showing Sarah Jenkins how to properly swaddle her newborn. But each interaction felt strained, each thank you perfunctory. On the 4th day, a group of women who had once welcomed Eleanor into their sewing circle watched her pass without greeting. That evening, no one called her to dinner, as they once had. By the 5th day, only the Jenkins family and Martha Peterson's husband bothered to acknowledge her at all. "Don't you worry about them vultures," Martha said when Eleanor visited to check her recovery. "People have short memories. Come winter's end, they'll remember who's been here through thick and thin." But Eleanor wasn't so sure. That night, as she sat alone in her small room, attached to the settlement's meeting house that doubled as her clinic, she watched the snow begin to fall more heavily. The wind had picked up, moaning around the corners of the building like a wounded animal. Morning brought confirmation of her fears. The dark clouds that had gathered over the distant mountains had unleashed their fury during the night. Snow fell in blinding sheets, and the wind howled with such ferocity that the windows rattled in their frames. Eleanor had just stoked her small stove when Thomas Wyatt burst in without knocking, followed by 3 other council members and a stranger. A young man in an expensive coat who looked barely old enough to shave. "Nurse Blackwood," Wyatt said over the howl of the wind, "this is Dr. James Bennett from Riverford. He made it just ahead of the storm." The young doctor extended his hand, his grip firm, but his smile uncertain. "Pleased to meet you, nurse. I've heard much about your service here." Eleanor's welcome was drowned out by Councilman Porter's booming voice. "We got word that Cherokee Falls is being evacuated. The storm's worse than anyone predicted. Some are saying it's the worst in 30 years. Eleanor frowned. "Cherokee Falls is nearly 20 miles east. If they're evacuating, we're gathering everyone at the meeting hall," Wyatt interrupted. "It's got the biggest stove and the sturdiest walls. Dr. Bennett will need your supplies." "Of course," Eleanor said, already moving to gather her medical bags. "I'll bring everything we might need." Porter and Wyatt exchanged glances. "Actually," Porter said slowly, "we were hoping you might check on the Patterson homestead. They're about 3 miles north, and they've got a new baby. With your experience in these conditions," the implication was clear, the dangerous task was being assigned to the expendable one. Eleanor looked from face to face, finding no allies. "I see," she said, keeping her voice level. "And Dr. Bennett will stay with the main group?" The young doctor had the grace to look embarrassed. "I'm not familiar with the territory," he offered lamely. "The path to Patterson's is straightforward," Wyatt said. "Follow the creek north until you see their smoke. You should make it there and back before the worst hits." Eleanor knew it was a lie, even as he said it. The storm was already fierce enough to obscure visibility beyond a few yards, but she also knew the Pattersons. Mary Patterson had delivered her baby just 2 weeks earlier, and her husband had broken his leg falling from the roof last month. They would need help. "I'll go," she said simply, reaching for her heaviest coat and scarf. 30 minutes later, Eleanor trudged through snow that already reached past her ankles, her medical bag clutched tightly against her chest. The wind whipped at her clothing and stung her exposed skin with ice crystals. She had lost sight of Whiteridge Creek within minutes, and now there was only white in every direction. She knew these lands well and had traversed them countless times in all seasons. But in a blizzard, familiarity offered little protection. The creek she was meant to follow was already disappearing under drifting snow. Landmarks vanished in the whiteout conditions. Still, Eleanor pressed on, one laborious step after another, thinking of Mary Patterson and her newborn. An hour into her journey, Eleanor realized she had made a terrible mistake. She should have been at the Patterson homestead by now, or at least within sight of it. The cold had seeped through her layers, numbing her fingers and toes, despite her woolen gloves and thick socks. Her face burned where the wind struck it, and her lungs ached with each breath of frigid air. She was lost. Eleanor fought down the panic rising in her throat. Panic killed in a blizzard faster than cold. She needed shelter. Scanning the blinding whiteness around her, she spotted a darker shape to her left, perhaps a stand of trees. Trees meant some protection from the wind, possibly a fallen log or outcropping where she could huddle. As she made her way toward the shadow, the ground suddenly disappeared beneath her feet. Eleanor tumbled down a snow-covered embankment, her medical bag flying from her grip. She landed hard, pain shooting through her ankle. When she tried to stand, the ankle gave way beneath her. "Help!" she called, but her voice was swallowed by the howling wind. No one would hear her. No one knew exactly where she had gone. And no one, she realized with sudden clarity, was likely to come looking for her, the expendable old nurse they'd wanted to replace. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor dragged herself toward the trees, progressing painfully slowly with her injured ankle. The cold sapped her strength with each passing minute. When she finally reached the shelter of the pines, she collapsed against a broad trunk, shivering uncontrollably. She knew the signs of hypothermia. The violent shivering would eventually stop. Not a good sign, but a warning that her body was losing the fight. Confusion would follow, then drowsiness. She needed to stay awake, to keep moving somehow. But exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. As darkness began to fall, intensifying the storm's gloom, Eleanor's thoughts turned strangely peaceful. She thought of her life, of the babies she had delivered who were now starting families, of their own, of wounds healed and fevers broken under her care. She had lived a life of purpose. Perhaps that was enough. Her eyelids grew heavy. Just a moment's rest, she told herself, knowing even as consciousness slipped away that she might never wake again. A sound penetrated the darkness, not the wind, but a low, rhythmic chanting. Eleanor struggled to open her eyes, certain she was dreaming. A figure moved through the swirling snow, approaching her tree. Tall and wrapped in furs, the figure seemed to part the blizzard like a ship cutting through waves. "Help," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. The figure knelt beside her, and Eleanor found herself looking into the weathered face of a Native American man. Deep lines etched his copper skin, and his dark eyes held both wisdom and concern. He touched her face with surprising gentleness, then her injured ankle. "Lila Schnei," he said, his voice deep and resonant even against the storm's fury. "Not dead." He worked quickly, removing a buffalo hide from his back and wrapping it around Eleanor. From a pouch at his waist, he produced crushed herbs, which he pressed to her lips. "Eat," he instructed in accented English. "For strength." The herbs were bitter, but spread warmth through Eleanor's body almost immediately. The man examined her ankle, then pulled a small container from another pouch. The slave he spread on the injury smelled of pine and something Eleanor couldn't identify, but the throbbing pain began to subside. Without warning, he lifted her as easily as if she were a child, cradling her against his chest. "My camp," he said. "Not far." Through the swirling snow, Eleanor could make out nothing that suggested direction or distance. Yet the man moved with confidence, his steps sure despite the treacherous conditions. She wanted to ask his name, to thank him, but the warmth of the buffalo hide and the strange herbs had made her drowsy in a different way than the cold had. Her last thought before drifting into sleep was that she had been found by the most unlikely of saviors. When Eleanor awoke, she was lying on soft furs inside a small domed structure. A fire burned in a central pit, smoke rising to an opening at the top. The blizzard's howl had diminished to a distant murmur. Her wet clothes had been replaced with a soft buckskin dress, and her injured ankle was wrapped in some kind of poultice that smelled of herbs and earth. The medicine man sat cross-legged on the other side of the fire, grinding something in a stone mortar. He looked up when she stirred. "You wake," he said simply. "Good." Eleanor pushed herself up on her elbows, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "You saved my life," she said. "Thank you." The man inclined his head slightly. "I am Grey Wolf, medicine man of the Lakota." "Eleanor Blackwood," she replied. "I'm a nurse from Whiteridge Creek, or I was," she added softly. Grey Wolf studied her face for a long moment. "The spirits guided me to you. They say you are a healer like me." Eleanor managed a weak smile. "Not any more, apparently. They say I'm too old now." Grey Wolf's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "The white man's way," he said. "Always looking for new things, throwing away what is still good." He gestured to his own face, to the deep lines etched there. "To my people, these mean wisdom, experience. A healer gains power with years, not loses it." He rose and moved to check the poultice on her ankle. His hands, Eleanor noticed, were strong and sure, despite their age, which she guessed to be at least 70. "How did you find me in that storm?" she asked. Grey Wolf continued his work as he spoke. "I was returning from gathering winter medicines. When the storm came, I made shelter and was preparing to wait when I heard the spirits singing. They led me to you." Under other circumstances, Eleanor might have dismissed such talk, but having been rescued from certain death in impossible conditions, she found herself open to explanations beyond the rational. "Are we far from Whiteridge?" she asked. "3 sleeps by foot in good weather," Grey Wolf replied. "We are near the sacred hills my people call Paha Sapa. You call them Black Hills." Eleanor's heart sank. 3 days' journey meant no one from the settlement would find her, even if they bothered to look. And with her ankle injured, she couldn't make the trip back anytime soon. As if reading her thoughts, Grey Wolf said, "The storm will last many days. Then the snow will be deep. You will stay until spring thaws." "Spring?" Eleanor gasped. "But that's months away. I can't impose on you for so long." Grey Wolf looked at her with those penetrating eyes. "You have somewhere else to go?" The blunt question struck Eleanor silent. Where indeed would she go? Back to a settlement that had discarded her? East to cities where an aging frontier nurse would find little welcome? "I don't know," she finally admitted. Grey Wolf nodded, as if her answer confirmed something. "Then you stay, rest, heal." He gestured to her ankle. "Both here and here," he added, touching his chest over his heart. As the blizzard raged outside the small lodge, Eleanor Blackwood realized she stood at a crossroads she had never anticipated. Cast out by her own people, rescued by a man from a culture she barely understood, she faced a winter of uncertainty, yet something in Grey Wolf's quiet confidence gave her a strange sense of peace. "Thank you," she said simply. Grey Wolf returned to his place by the fire and resumed grinding. His herbs. "Sleep now," he said. "Tomorrow I will teach you Lakota medicine. You will teach me your ways. We will both become stronger healers." As Eleanor drifted back to sleep, lulled by the crackling fire and the distant howl of the storm, she wondered what the coming months would bring. One thing seemed certain: this was not the end of her story, but perhaps the beginning of a new chapter she could never have imagined. Days melted into weeks as the blizzard finally subsided, leaving behind a pristine landscape of towering snowdrifts and ice-glazed trees. Inside Grey Wolf's lodge, a new rhythm of life had established itself. Eleanor's ankle was healing well under the medicine man's care, the swelling reduced and the pain dulled to a manageable ache. More surprising to her was how quickly she had adapted to life in the small, warm shelter. "The willow bark reduces fever," Grey Wolf explained one morning, showing Eleanor a strip of pale inner bark. "Like your white man's aspirin, but gentler on the stomach." Eleanor nodded, adding this information to her growing mental catalogue of Lakota remedies. "We use willow bark too, though many doctors now prefer manufactured medicines. They're more consistent in strength, but as you say, harder on the body sometimes." This exchange of knowledge had become their daily practice. Eleanor would share her training in anatomy, germ theory, and surgical techniques, while Grey Wolf taught her the medicinal properties of dozens of plants and the Lakota understanding of balance between body and spirit. Initially skeptical of some of his more mystical explanations, Eleanor found herself increasingly open to the idea that healing involved more than just treating physical symptoms. "Your medicine focuses on fighting the enemy, the disease," Grey Wolf observed as he showed her how to prepare a poultice of pine resin and herbs. "Our way is to restore harmony. Both have power." On a crisp morning, when the sun transformed the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds, Grey Wolf announced they would leave the lodge. "Your ankle is strong enough now. You should see where you're living." Eleanor had been taking short walks outside to rebuild her strength, but they had stayed close to the lodge. Now, Grey Wolf handed her a pair of snowshoes made of bent wood and rawhide lacings. "These were my wife's," he said, a flicker of old pain crossing his weathered features. "She walked to the spirit world 5 winters ago." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, accepting the snowshoes with reverence. "Were you together long?" 52 summers, Grey Wolf replied. "She was a healer, too. She would approve of you using her shoes." The simple statement touched Eleanor deeply. She had learned that among the Lakota, a man's wife's possessions were often buried with her or given to female relatives. That Grey Wolf would offer his late wife's snowshoes to a white woman spoke of his unusual openness, and perhaps of his loneliness too. Learning to walk on snowshoes proved challenging. Eleanor fell repeatedly, each time expecting Grey Wolf to show impatience. Instead, he waited silently, offering a hand only when she was ready to rise again. By midday, she had gained enough proficiency to follow him up a gentle slope through a stand of pines. When they emerged from the trees, Eleanor gasped. Before them stretched a valley, blanketed in untouched snow, ringed by dark hills that rose toward distant mountains. The beauty was breathtaking, pristine, vast, and utterly silent, except for the whisper of wind. "Wakan," Grey Wolf said softly. "Sacred." Eleanor understood why the Lakota fought so fiercely to protect these lands. The valley humbled her, making the concerns of Whiteridge Creek seem petty and distant. "My people lived in this valley for many generations," Grey Wolf said, gesturing toward the far end where a half-frozen stream glinted in the sunlight. "Now most live on the reservation. I am one of the few permitted to stay in our traditional lands because of my medical role." "Permitted?" Eleanor echoed, the word tasting bitter. "On your own land." Grey Wolf's expression remained impassive, but his eyes held centuries of grief. "Your government makes many promises on paper. Then white men find gold or good farming land, and the papers change." Shame washed over Eleanor. While she had never personally supported the policies that had displaced native peoples, she had benefited from them, settling on land that had once belonged to others. She had treated Native Americans who came to Whiteridge Creek for supplies with the same care. She showed all patience, but she had never truly confronted the larger injustice. "I'm sorry," she said inadequately. Grey Wolf studied her face, then nodded once. "You did not make these decisions, but you can learn from them. All life deserves respect, the young and the old, all peoples, all creatures." He pointed to a distant line of dark shapes moving along a ridge. "Even the wolf, whom your people hunt as an enemy, has wisdom to teach about loyalty and cooperation." They watched the wolf pack until it disappeared over the ridge, then made their way back to the lodge, as afternoon shadows lengthened across the snow. That night, as they sat by the fire sharing a simple meal of dried venison and wild rice, Eleanor found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few weeks. "May I ask you something, Grey Wolf?" she said, after a comfortable silence. He nodded, his face half illuminated by the dancing flames. "Why did you save me? You could have left me to die, one less white person to trouble your people." Grey Wolf considered the question with the same thoughtfulness he applied to all matters. "When I was a young man," he finally said, "I was full of anger toward the Wasichu, the white man. I would have left you." He touched the silver streaks in his long hair. "But the winters teach wisdom. I learned that hatred clouds the eyes and poisons the spirit. My duty as a healer is to all who suffer." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Besides," he added with the faint smile that Eleanor had come to recognize as his version of humor, "you were too stubborn to die. Anyone who fights a blizzard so hard deserves another chance." Eleanor laughed, surprised by his perception. "I am stubborn. My mother always said it would be my downfall." "Or your salvation," Grey Wolf countered. "Stubbornness kept you alive until I found you. Now you must decide what to do with the life that was returned to you." The question lingered in Eleanor's mind as January yielded to February. Her ankle healed completely, and she grew stronger daily, adapting to the physical demands of life. In the wilderness, Grey Wolf taught her to move silently through the snow, to identify animal tracks, to find food and medicine even in the depths of winter. In return, she organized his medical supplies, introducing the concept of categorization that amused him, but which he acknowledged was efficient. They established a routine of gathering, preparing, and preserving remedies together. Grey Wolf's knowledge seemed limitless. He could identify hundreds of plants even when buried under snow, knowing them by the shape of a dried stem or the pattern of bark. Eleanor, with her methodical mind, created a notebook using paper from her salvaged medical bag, documenting each remedy with scientific precision that both amused and impressed the medicine man. "You write everything down," he observed one evening, as she sketched a particular route and noted its applications. "My people remember through stories and songs." "Different methods, same goal," Eleanor replied, "though I admit your way has worked for thousands of years without requiring pencils." During a brief thaw in late February, they received their first visitors, 3 Lakota men from the reservation who had journeyed to consult with Grey Wolf about a sickness affecting their children. They were startled to find a white woman in the medicine man's lodge, but accepted Grey Wolf's brief explanation that she was a healer who had been lost in the storm. Eleanor listened as Grey Wolf questioned the men in their language, catching occasional words she had learned during her stay. When they described symptoms, fever, rash, difficulty breathing, she recognized the signs of scarlet fever, a disease she had treated often among settlers. "May I speak?" she asked Grey Wolf quietly. He nodded, and Eleanor addressed the visitors, with Grey Wolf translating. She explained the nature of the illness, how it spread, and the importance of isolation to prevent further contagion. Then she and Grey Wolf prepared medicines together, his herbs to reduce fever and strengthen the body, combined with instructions for hygiene and quarantine that Eleanor knew would help contain the outbreak. As the men prepared to leave with Their precious cargo of medicine, the oldest among them, a man called Running Elk, studied Eleanor with keen eyes. "Grandmother," he said in halting English, using the term of respect for an elder woman, "you are not what I expected from a Wasichu healer." "Nor am I what my own people expected," Eleanor replied with a wry smile, "which is why I now live here." Running Elk nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps Wakantanka, the Great Spirit, placed you in the snow for Grey Wolf to find. Two old trees supporting each other stand stronger against the wind." After the men departed, Grey Wolf and Eleanor sat in companionable silence by the fire. Finally, Eleanor voiced the thought that had been growing in her mind. "I want to help your people," she said. "Not to replace your medicine, but to work alongside it. The children on the reservation, they're vulnerable to diseases brought by white settlers. Together, we might save lives that would otherwise be lost." Grey Wolf studied her face for a long moment. "This would not be easy," he said at last. "Many of my people distrust anything associated with white ways. And your people, would they accept you working among the Lakota?" The question gave Eleanor a pause. The citizens of Whiteridge Creek had rejected her for being too old, but how much stronger would their condemnation be if she allied herself with the Native Americans they alternately feared and dismissed? "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm beginning to think it doesn't matter. I've spent my life trying to heal the sick and ease suffering." "Does it matter who receives that care?" Grey Wolf nodded slowly. "This is good medicine thinking." He gestured to the notebook in her lap. "Your knowledge and mine together, like braiding sweetgrass to make it stronger." As March arrived with its unpredictable weather, brilliant sunshine one day, howling snowstorms the next, Eleanor and Grey Wolf began preparing medicines specifically for the reservation's needs. Eleanor taught Grey Wolf how to recognize symptoms of diseases common among white settlements, but previously rare among the Lakota: measles, diphtheria, smallpox, while he showed her how to strengthen general health through balanced nutrition. And herbal tonics. Their partnership deepened into friendship as they worked side by side. Grey Wolf began sharing stories of his youth, of the old ways before reservations, of his training as a medicine man that had begun when he was just a boy. Eleanor told him of her childhood in Boston, her brief engagement to a man who died before they could marry, her decision to use her nursing skills on the frontier where they were desperately needed. "We are not so different," Grey Wolf observed one evening. "Both called for healing, both living between worlds." Eleanor nodded, realizing the truth in his words. She had always existed somewhat apart from others, educated when most frontier women were not, unmarried by circumstance, dedicated to her profession above all else. Grey Wolf, with his position as a medicine man and his unusual willingness to interact with white society when necessary, also straddled different worlds. The first signs of spring arrived in early April, patches of bare ground appearing beneath trees, the return of birdsong, creeks swelling with snowmelt. Eleanor felt both excitement and trepidation at the changing season. Soon the trails would be passable again. Decisions would need to be made. One crystal-clear morning, Grey Wolf announced they would make a journey. "There is someone you should meet," he said, offering no further explanation as they set out toward the east. They traveled through the day, Grey Wolf setting a pace that challenged Eleanor but remained within her capabilities. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing where a solitary cabin stood, smoke rising from its chimney. To Eleanor's surprise, Grey Wolf approached openly, calling out a greeting. The door opened to reveal a white man in his 60s, tall and lean, with a full grey beard and sharp eyes that widened at the sight of Eleanor. "I'll be damned," the man said. "Grey Wolf bringing a white woman to my doorstep. The world truly is changing." "Eleanor Blackwood, this is Samuel Adkins," Grey Wolf said. "A wise man for a Wasichu. He trades fairly and keeps his word." Samuel's weathered face broke into a grin. High praise from you, old friend. He gestured toward the cabin. Come in, both of you. Any friend of Grey Wolf's is welcome here, especially with evening coming on. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly comfortable, clean and well-organized with books lining one wall, a luxury Eleanor hadn't seen since leaving Whiteridge Creek. Samuel busied himself preparing coffee, while Eleanor and Grey Wolf seated themselves at a rough-hewn table. "So," Samuel said as he served the steaming drinks, "might I ask how a lady who is clearly educated and civilized comes to be traveling with my Lakota friend here?" Eleanor shared her story: the rejection by Whiteridge Creek, the blizzard, her rescue and subsequent winter with Grey Wolf. Samuel listened intently, occasionally glancing at Grey Wolf with raised eyebrows. "Quite the tale," he said when she finished. "Though I can't say I'm surprised by Whiteridge's behavior. Progress, they call it. Out with the old, in with the new, whether the new is better or not." "You know of Whiteridge Creek?" Eleanor asked. Samuel nodded. "I trade with settlements throughout the territory. Whiteridge has always been particularly ambitious, determined to become a proper town with all the proper town trappings, including a young male doctor instead of an aging female nurse," Eleanor said, with a hint of bitterness she thought she'd moved beyond. "Their loss," Samuel said simply, "though perhaps a gain for others." He looked meaningfully at Grey Wolf, who had been silent throughout the exchange. As night fell, Samuel insisted they stay. "The guest room is small but comfortable," he told Eleanor, "and Grey Wolf, as usual, will probably prefer his bedroll by the fire, despite my offering better." After Eleanor retired to the small room, she could hear the low murmur of male voices. From the main room, Grey Wolf and Samuel deep in conversation. She caught fragments: reservation conditions, government agent, medicine shortage, before sleep claimed her. The next morning over breakfast, Samuel spread a map on the table. "Grey Wolf tells me you're interested in providing medical care to the Lakota," he said without preamble. Eleanor glanced at Grey Wolf, who nodded encouragement. "Yes," she confirmed, "combining my training with his traditional knowledge." Samuel stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Noble intention, also damn difficult to execute." He tapped a spot on the map. "The reservation is here. Conditions are challenging. The Indian agent is a bureaucrat named Wilson who cares more for rules than people." His finger moved to another location. "However, there's a trading post here just outside reservation boundaries. I have connections with the owner, a half-Lakota man named Charles Running Bear. He might be willing to provide space for a clinic." Eleanor felt a surge of hope. "You think it could work?" "I think it's worth trying," Samuel said. "The Lakota are dying from diseases they have no immunity against, and the government doctors are too few and often incompetent. Grey Wolf is respected, but he can't be everywhere. Together you might bridge two medical traditions in a way that could save lives." He rolled up the map decisively. "I make monthly supply runs to the trading post. My next trip is in 2 weeks. You'd be welcome to accompany me." Eleanor looked to Grey Wolf, who inclined his head slightly. "It would be good medicine," he said quietly. That night, back in Grey Wolf's lodge, Eleanor sat by the fire, her mind racing with possibilities. The idea that had been forming throughout the winter now crystallized into resolution. Her life at Whiteridge Creek was over, but perhaps a new purpose awaited her, more meaningful than anything she had imagined. "You are troubled," Grey Wolf observed, passing her a cup of tea scented with pine and mint. "Not troubled," Eleanor corrected, accepting the warm cup gratefully, "just contemplating change. Again." "Life is changing," Grey Wolf said with the calm certainty that characterized him. "The seasons do not resist turning one into another. Neither should we." Eleanor smiled at the simple wisdom. "You make it sound so straightforward." "The path is never straight," Grey Wolf replied, But when the heart and mind agree on direction, the feet find a way forward. Her heart and mind did agree, Eleanor realized. The winter had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Cast out by her community, she had found a deeper sense of purpose and belonging with this unlikely teacher and friend. "I want to establish that clinic," she said firmly, "not just for the Lakota, but for anyone who needs help, native or settler. A place where your medicine and mine work together." Grey Wolf nodded, satisfaction evident in his dark eyes. "Then it will be. The path will not be easy, but no path worth walking ever is." As they sat in comfortable silence watching the fire, Eleanor thought of the blizzard that had nearly claimed her life. What had seemed like an ending had proven to be a beginning. Instead, abandoned because of her age, she had discovered that her greatest contributions might still lie ahead. And in this remote wilderness, where two cultures collided often with tragic results, perhaps she and Grey Wolf could build something healing, a bridge of compassion and shared knowledge across the divide. Outside, the wind whispered through, awakening pines, carrying the promise of spring and new beginnings. Within Eleanor's heart, a similar whisper grew stronger, the certainty that she had found not just survival in the wilderness, but her true calling at last. The journey to the trading post took 3 days, winding through terrain that was by turns breathtaking and treacherous. Spring's arrival had left the trails muddy and riddled with half-frozen puddles, while streams swollen with snowmelt presented challenging crossings. Samuel led the way in his wagon, loaded with trade goods, with Eleanor riding beside him and Grey Wolf following on a sturdy pinto pony. As they traveled, Samuel shared his history with the region, 27 years as a trapper, trader, and occasional scout, witnessing firsthand the profound changes that had swept through the territory. "I've seen buffalo herds that stretched to the horizon," he told Eleanor as their wagon creaked along a particularly rutted section of trail. "Now they're nearly gone, shot for their hides or just for sport." He shook his head, grief evident in his weathered face. "The waste of it haunts me. The Lakota and other tribes depended on those animals for everything: food, clothing, shelter, tools. Destroying the buffalo was a way of destroying a way of life." Eleanor glanced back at Grey Wolf, who rode silently, his face impassive but his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. She had come to recognize this vigilance as a survival skill honed through decades of living in contested territory. "How did you come to be friends with Grey Wolf?" she asked Samuel. "It seems unusual for your time." Samuel chuckled. "Unusual is one word for it. Downright suspicious, according to most white folks and more than a few Lakota." He flicked the reins gently, guiding the team around a large puddle. "It started 15 years back during a brutal winter. I got caught in a blizzard much like you did, though I managed to find shelter in a cave. Problem was, the cave already had an occupant, a grizzly who wasn't pleased about sharing." He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a set of parallel scars running. "And from elbow to wrist, Bear left his mark before I could shoot him. I was bleeding badly, miles from anywhere in a raging storm." Samuel's eyes crinkled at the memory. "Grey Wolf found me half dead 2 days later, treated the wounds with some concoction that burned like fire, but prevented the infection that surely would have killed me." "And he took you in?" Eleanor asked. Samuel shook his head. "Not exactly. The Lakota were still actively fighting the army back then. He couldn't bring a white man to his people. Instead, he visited my shelter daily, bringing food and medicine, until I was strong enough to travel." The trader smiled faintly. "We didn't share more than a dozen words that whole time. But when a man saves your life, it creates a bond that doesn't need much talking." Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. She and Grey Wolf had formed their own bond under similar circumstances, though they had progressed far beyond wordless gratitude in the month since her rescue. By late afternoon of the third day, they crested a hill to see their destination sprawled below, a collection of log buildings surrounding a larger central structure with a corral of horses and several wagons parked nearby. A wooden sign proclaimed it Running Bear's Trading Post, though the peeling paint suggested the sign had weathered many seasons. As they approached, a tall man with broad shoulders emerged from the main building. His features reflected his mixed heritage. His father's Lakota cheekbones and dark eyes, combined with his mother's lighter complexion and brown hair, now streaked with grey and worn longer than most white men, but shorter than traditional Lakota style. "Samuel!" the man called, his face breaking into a broad smile. "Right on schedule, old friend." "Charles," Samuel acknowledged with a wave, "brought you some interesting travelers this time." Charles Running Bear's gaze shifted to Eleanor, then to Grey Wolf, who had dismounted and was standing quietly beside the wagon. Recognition flashed in his eyes. "Medicine man," he said respectfully in Lakota, then switched to English. "An unexpected honor. And your companion?" Eleanor climbed down from the wagon, extending her hand. "Eleanor Blackwood, former nurse of White Ridge Creek." "Former?" Charles raised an eyebrow, shaking her hand with gentle strength. "It's a long story," Samuel interjected. "One best told over dinner, I'm thinking." Charles nodded, instantly hospitable. "Of course. Come inside, all of you. Maggie's got a stew that's been simmering all day." The interior of the trading post was an intriguing blend of frontier practicality and unexpected refinements. Shelves stocked with essentials, flour, coffee, ammunition, tools, lined the walls, while glass cases displayed finer goods, pocket watches, hair combs, bolts of colored fabric. A pot-bellied stove radiated welcome heat in the center of the room, and doorways led to what Eleanor presumed were storage areas and living quarters. From one such doorway appeared a woman in her 40s, her black hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a calico dress beneath a practical apron. Her features marked her as fully Lakota, though her clothing was primarily in the white style. "Margaret Running Bear," Charles introduced her. "My wife, and the reason this place runs half as well as it does. Maggie, this is Eleanor Blackwood, and you know Grey Wolf, of course." Margaret's dark eyes assessed Eleanor quickly before warming with welcome. "Any friend of Grey Wolf's is welcome here," she said, her English clear but accented. "You must be hungry after your journey." Over a hearty meal of venison stew, fresh-baked bread and preserves, Eleanor and Grey Wolf shared their story and their vision for a clinic that would serve both native and settler populations. Charles and Margaret exchanged frequent glances as they listened, their expressions shifting from surprise to thoughtful consideration. "It's an admirable idea," Charles said when they had finished. "Also a complicated one. The Indian agent, Wilson, controls who has official access to the reservation. He's unlikely to welcome a white woman working with a traditional medicine man. He views Grey Wolf's influence as problematic. Wilson wants the old ways forgotten," Margaret added, her voice tight with controlled anger. "He thinks progress means becoming white in all but skin color." Grey Wolf nodded, his face solemn. "This is why many of our people grow sick in spirit as well as body. When you tell a person their ways have no value, you wound something deep inside." "But you wouldn't need to operate on the reservation itself," Samuel pointed out. "The trading post sits on public land. Many Lakota come here regularly for supplies." Charles leaned back in his chair, considering. "There's the old missionary cabin," he said slowly, "about a quarter-mile north. The Baptist fellow who built it gave up after 2 years when he couldn't convert anyone. It's been empty since, though we've maintained it for travelers needing shelter. It has 2 rooms," Margaret added. "Simple but sound. With some work, it could serve as both a clinic and living quarters. Eleanor felt a flutter of excitement. May we see it tomorrow? Charles nodded. First thing in the morning. For tonight, we have rooms prepared for all of you. Later, unable to sleep, despite the comfort of a real bed for the first time in months, Eleanor stood by the window of her small room, gazing at the star-filled sky. The prospect of establishing a clinic both thrilled and daunted her. Could she truly build a practice that bridged two medical traditions? Would anyone actually come, native or white? A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Margaret holding a steaming cup. "Chamomile," the Lakota woman said, offering the tea. "I thought you might be finding sleep difficult in a strange place." Eleanor accepted the cup gratefully, inviting Margaret inside. The two women sat on the edge of the bed, an unexpected moment of feminine companionship after months in the largely male world of Grey Wolf and his occasional visitors. "How did you come to be here?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious about the other woman's story. Margaret's lips curved in a small smile. "Not so different from your journey. I was trained as a healer among my people, but then the government placed us on the reservation and brought in white doctors who dismissed our medicine as superstition." Her fingers traced the pattern on her cup. "I married Charles 16 years ago when he was just starting this trading post. I help where I can, mixing traditional remedies for those who still believe in them. Then you understand what we're trying to do," Eleanor said. "I understand the intention," Margaret replied carefully. "I question whether it's possible. The barriers between our worlds are not easily breached. You and Charles seem to have managed it." Margaret's expression softened. "Yes, but at a cost. We belong fully to neither world now. The Lakota see Charles as too white, and whites see him as too Indian. I am viewed with suspicion by my own people for adopting some white ways." She studied Eleanor's face intently. "Are you prepared for such a life? To be viewed as a traitor by some of your race and a curiosity at best by mine?" The question struck Eleanor silent. She had been so focused on the medical aspects of her plan that she hadn't fully considered its social implications. Yet, hadn't she already stepped irreversibly onto this path the moment she decided to stay with Grey Wolf rather than trying to return to White Ridge or head east? "I think," she said slowly, "that I've already chosen that life, whether I realized it or not. When White Ridge rejected me, something broke inside me. My faith in the community I'd served for so long. But something else has grown in its place. A different kind of belonging, perhaps." Margaret nodded, seemingly satisfied with Eleanor's answer. "Then I will help you, healer Eleanor. There is great need for what you and Grey Wolf can offer together." She rose, heading for the door. "Rest now. Tomorrow will bring new challenges." The missionary cabin, as it turned out, was better than Eleanor had dared hope. Though dusty from disuse, its log walls were solid, its roof sound, and its stone fireplace in good condition. The larger front room had windows on 3 sides, providing excellent light, while the smaller back room offered privacy for a sleeping area. "The missionary left most of his furniture," Charles explained as they explored the space. "Said it wasn't worth hauling back east." A large oak table dominated the front room, perfect for examinations or preparing medicines. Shelves lined one wall, and a rocking chair sat near the fireplace. The back room contained a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small writing desk. Eleanor moved from window to window, opening shutters to let in fresh air and spring sunlight. Her mind raced with possibilities: where to store medicines, how to arrange the space for treating patients, where Grey Wolf's traditional remedies would be prepared. "What do you think?" she asked the medicine man, who had been silently examining the cabin. Grey Wolf ran his hand along the rough-hewn mantel. "Good bones," he said simply. "The spirit of this place is peaceful now. The missionary's frustration has faded." He looked at Eleanor with quiet certainty. "We can heal here." Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor threw herself into transforming the cabin into a functioning clinic. Samuel delayed his departure to help with repairs and modifications, while Charles provided supplies from his trading post. Often, Eleanor suspected, at prices well below their actual value. Margaret proved an invaluable ally, helping clean every surface and offering practical suggestions for organizing the space to accommodate both white and Lakota patients who might be uncomfortable with each other's presence. Grey Wolf contributed in his own way, performing a cleansing ceremony to prepare the space for its healing purpose and establishing a small garden of medicinal plants behind the cabin. At Eleanor's request, he carved a simple sign for the front door: Blackwood and Grey Wolf, healers. The ampersand between their names seemed symbolically important to Eleanor, neither name subordinate to the other, but joined in partnership. Word of the unusual clinic spread quickly. Their first patient arrived before the renovations were even complete, a Lakota mother with a feverish child. Eleanor and Grey Wolf worked together seamlessly, diagnosing an ear infection while he prepared a pain-relieving herbal remedy to complement the treatment she prescribed. More patients followed, primarily Lakota at first, trusting Grey Wolf's presence and gradually extending that trust to Eleanor. Then came a trapper with a badly infected hand, a settler family with a sick baby, 2 Lakota elders seeking relief from rheumatism. Each was treated with a blend of approaches, Eleanor and Grey Wolf consulting each other and combining their knowledge to provide the most effective care possible. Not everyone approved of the unconventional partnership. A week after they officially opened, a government buggy pulled up outside the cabin. A thin man in a formal suit and bowler hat strode in without knocking, his pale eyes taking in the scene with evident distaste. Eleanor bandaging a young Lakota man's arm, while Grey Wolf prepared a poultice nearby. "I am Howard Wilson, Indian agent for this reservation," the man announced, ignoring the patient entirely. "I'm told you're practicing medicine here without proper authorization." Eleanor straightened, maintaining her professional composure despite her instant dislike of the officious man. "This clinic is on public land, Mr. Wilson, not reservation property, and I am a fully trained nurse with 15 years of frontier medical experience." Wilson's gaze shifted to Grey Wolf, his expression hardening. "And this individual, what credentials does he possess?" "Grey Wolf is a certified medicine man of the Lakota people," Eleanor replied evenly. "His knowledge of traditional remedies is unparalleled." "Traditional remedies?" Wilson repeated with barely concealed scorn. "You mean pagan superstitions and primitive concoctions, hardly proper medicine." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, but maintained her composure. "Mr. Wilson, I've practiced medicine from Boston to the Dakota Territory. I can assure you that many traditional remedies are not only effective, but often gentler on patients than more modern approaches. We offer the best of both traditions here." Wilson's mouth pinched into a tight line. "I cannot prevent you from operating this establishment on public land, but I strongly discourage any reservation residents from seeking treatment here, rather than from the agency doctor." "The agency doctor who visits once a month, if weather permits," Eleanor countered, "who speaks no Lakota and has little understanding of the specific health challenges facing the people under your care." The Indian agent's face flushed. "The government's approach to Indian affairs is progressive and scientific. These people need to adapt to modern ways, not cling to primitive practices." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I'll be watching this operation closely, Miss Blackwood. One misstep, one patient harmed, and I'll have grounds to shut you down permanently." After he departed, Grey Wolf calmly resumed preparing his poultice as if the interruption had never occurred. Their young patient, however, looked troubled. "Agent Wilson has much power," he said in halting English. "He can make trouble for anyone who comes here. He can try," Eleanor replied, finishing the bandage with practiced efficiency. "But healing isn't political, and pain doesn't distinguish between cultures. People will come because they need us, not because an Indian agent gives permission." Grey Wolf nodded approvingly. "The beaver does not ask the eagle how to build its dam. Each creature has wisdom for its own path. As spring blossomed into early summer, the clinic established itself as a vital resource for both communities. Eleanor and Grey Wolf developed routines that capitalized on their complementary skills. She handled most surgeries and acute illnesses, specializing in chronic conditions and preventive care. Both contributed to maternal and infant health, an area where their combined knowledge proved particularly effective. Word spread beyond the immediate area. Patients began traveling significant distances to seek their care, sometimes camping nearby for several days while receiving treatment. Margaret organized a rotating group of Lakota women to provide meals for those who had journeyed far, while Charles extended credit at the trading post to families who had spent what little money they had on the journey to the clinic. One evening, in late June, as Eleanor and Grey Wolf sat on the cabin's small porch enjoying the long summer twilight after a particularly demanding day, Samuel's wagon appeared on the trail from the east. Eleanor waved in welcome, always glad to see the trader, who had become a loyal friend and supporter of their endeavor. This time, however, Samuel was not alone. Beside him on the wagon seat sat a younger man, whose features Eleanor recognized instantly, despite the months that had passed. Dr. James Bennett, the young physician who had replaced her at White Ridge Creek, looked as uncomfortable as a cat in a rainstorm. "Eleanor," Samuel called cheerfully as he pulled the wagon to a stop, "brought someone who's been asking about you." She rose slowly, conscious of Grey Wolf's silent vigilance beside her. "Dr. Bennett, this is a surprise." The young doctor climbed down awkwardly, removing his hat. Up close, he looked even younger than Eleanor remembered, barely more than a boy playing at being a physician. But there was something different about him now, a haunted quality in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice strained. "May I speak with you, privately if possible?" Eleanor exchanged a glance with Grey Wolf, who inclined his head slightly. "I will check our medicine stores," he said, disappearing inside the cabin. Samuel made a similar excuse, leading his horses toward the small barn behind the trading post, leaving Eleanor and Bennett alone on the porch. "You look well," Bennett said awkwardly. "That is, healthy, alive." "No thanks to White Ridge Creek," Eleanor couldn't help replying, then immediately regretted the bitterness in her tone. "Please, sit. What brings you all this way, Doctor?" Bennett sank onto the bench, turning his hat in his hands. "White Ridge has been difficult," he admitted. "After you left, after we sent you out in that storm, things fell apart quickly. The influenza hit a week later. Without your experience, it was bad, Miss Blackwood, very bad." Eleanor felt a chill despite the warm evening. "How many?" 27 dead, mostly children and the elderly." Bennett's voice cracked. "I did everything I was taught, everything by the book, but nothing seemed to help. They kept asking for you. Nurse Blackwood would know," they said. "She's seen this before." A complicated tangle of emotions tightened Eleanor's chest. Grief for lives lost, vindication that her experience had been valued too late, pity for the young doctor thrust into a situation beyond his training. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "First outbreaks in isolated communities are always the worst. The people have no immunity." Bennett nodded miserably. "Wyatt tried to find you after the storm, said they'd made a terrible mistake. But the snow was too deep, the trails impassable. They found your medical bag half buried in a drift and assumed—" He swallowed hard. "Everyone believed you had died out there because of their decision. I nearly did. Eleanor said quietly. If Grey Wolf hadn't found me when he did, I wouldn't be sitting here now. Bennett glanced toward the cabin door. The Indian, the medicine man, he saved you? He did more than that, Eleanor replied. He taught me that healing doesn't belong exclusively to one culture or tradition. That wisdom can come from unexpected sources if we're humble enough to recognize it. She studied the young doctor's face, noting the exhaustion etched there. But you didn't come all this way just to tell me Whiteridge regrets its decision. What do you want, Dr. Bennett? He met her eyes directly for the first time. I want to learn, Miss Blackwood. From you. From your colleague, if he's willing. My fancy education didn't prepare me for frontier medicine. I need practical knowledge, the kind that comes from experience. His grip tightened on his hat. I need to know how to keep more people from dying under my care. Of all the things Eleanor had expected, this humble request wasn't among them. She considered the young man before her, recognizing that it must have cost him considerable pride to seek help from the woman he had replaced, and from a native healer his education would have dismissed as irrelevant. It won't be easy, she warned. What we practice here combines approaches that many would consider incompatible. You'll need to set aside certain assumptions your medical school instilled. I'm ready, Bennett said simply. After what I've seen, I just want to be a better doctor, whatever it takes. Eleanor nodded slowly. Then we'll try. I can't promise Grey Wolf will agree to teach you, but I'll speak with him. As the summer sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows. Across the prairie, Eleanor realized how far she had traveled from that snowy day when Whiteridge had cast her out. Abandoned because of her age, she had found not an ending but a new beginning. In the wilderness that had nearly claimed her life, she had discovered a deeper purpose and unexpected allies. The clinic she and Grey Wolf had established was more than a place of healing. It was a bridge between worlds, a testament to the power of wisdom that transcended cultural boundaries. And now, perhaps, it would also become a place of teaching, passing knowledge to a new generation that might carry it forward. Eleanor Blackwood, the too-old frontier nurse left to die in a blizzard, had instead found rebirth, not despite her age and experience, but because of them. As she watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky, she felt a profound sense of gratitude to the storm that had changed her course and the medicine man who had shown her a new path forward. As summer progressed into fall, the clinic settled into a new rhythm with Dr. Bennett's arrival. Initially, the young doctor's presence created tension. Grey Wolf observed him with quiet skepticism, particularly when Bennett reflexively questioned traditional remedies or reached for his medical bag before considering alternatives. You must empty your cup before it can be filled with new knowledge. Grey Wolf told Bennett one morning after the doctor had dismissed a willow bark preparation in favor of his own medicines. Bennett's face had flushed with embarrassment. I'm trying, he insisted. But 15 years of education is difficult to set aside. No one is asking you to discard your training, Eleanor explained more gently, only to recognize its limitations and remain open to other approaches. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during the treatment of a Lakota elder suffering from severe breathing difficulties. Bennett diagnosed pneumonia and recommended standard treatments that had proven ineffective for the man's condition in the past. Instead of dismissing the doctor's suggestions, Grey Wolf quietly invited him to observe a steam treatment using specific pine resins and herbs. Watch his breathing, Grey Wolf instructed as the elder inhaled the aromatic steam. See how the passages open. Bennett's clinical skepticism gave way to genuine curiosity as he observed the immediate improvement. The volatile oils in the pine must be acting as a bronchodilator, he murmured, medical terminology attempting to make sense of traditional wisdom. And these particular herbs, they seem to reduce the inflammation more effectively than anything in my pharmacopoeia. From that day forward, Bennett approached his apprenticeship with newfound humility. He began keeping a journal similar to Eleanor's, documenting traditional remedies alongside scientific explanations where possible. When no explanation presented itself, he simply recorded the results, accepting that effective treatment didn't always require complete understanding of mechanisms. The clinic's reputation continued to grow, drawing patients from increasingly distant settlements and reservations. By mid-September, Eleanor, Grey Wolf, and Bennett were often working from sunrise until well past sunset, their unique combination of skills addressing ailments that might have proven fatal without their intervention. Word of their success eventually reached the territorial authorities, arriving in the form of a letter from the Department of Indian Affairs requesting an official assessment of their experimental approach to frontier medicine. The letter hinted at potential official recognition and support if their methods proved sound, an unexpected development that caused both excitement and trepidation. It could mean supplies, funding, perhaps even expansion, Eleanor noted as she discussed the letter with Grey Wolf and Bennett on the clinic's porch one evening. The autumn air carried a crisp edge, prompting them to wrap in blankets as they watched the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. Or it could mean interference, Bennett countered, his initial idealism tempered by months on the frontier. Government oversight rarely comes without strings attached. Grey Wolf, who had been quietly contemplating the horizon, finally spoke. The white man's government gives with one hand and takes with the other. This has always been their way. He turned to Eleanor, his dark eyes reflecting the fading light. But if this brings more healing to my people and yours, then we must try. The government inspector arrived on a blustery October day when the clinic was unusually quiet. Dr. Philip Harrington proved to be a surprise. Not the stern bureaucrat they had expected, but a thoughtful man in his 60s with a salt and pepper beard and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He introduced himself as a physician who had spent 20 years with the army before joining the Department of Indian Affairs. I've seen a great deal of suffering that might have been prevented with better understanding between medical traditions, he explained as Eleanor showed him around the clinic. My superiors are skeptical of your approach here, but I convinced them to keep an open mind. Over the next 3 days, Harrington observed their work, taking meticulous notes as they treated patients. He asked penetrating questions about specific remedies, cross-referencing Grey Wolf's traditional knowledge with Bennett's medical texts. He seemed particularly interested in their success rates with respiratory illnesses, which had proven especially deadly on reservations. On the evening before his departure, Harrington joined them for dinner at the trading post, where Charles and Margaret had prepared a meal that showcased both Lakota and settler cuisines. The conversation remained light until the meal concluded, when Harrington cleared his throat and addressed the group. I came here expecting to find well-intentioned amateurs experimenting dangerously, he admitted, his gaze moving from face to face. Instead, I've discovered what may be the most effective medical practice in the territory. Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Then you'll recommend continuation of our work? More than that, Harrington replied. I intend to propose establishing similar clinics near other reservations, using your model of combined approaches. He turned to Grey Wolf with genuine respect. The knowledge your people have accumulated over centuries deserves preservation and integration with our medical science. Together, they offer solutions neither tradition could provide alone. Grey Wolf acknowledged this with a slight nod, his usual reserve softened by clear satisfaction. There is one condition, Harrington added, his expression turning serious. The department requires formal documentation and training protocols. Your methods need to be recorded, systematized, and made teachable to others who lack your personal experience. The request struck Eleanor as both reasonable and daunting. How could they possibly codify the intuitive understanding that she and Grey Wolf had developed through their unusual partnership? Bennett, however, immediately grasped the opportunity. "My journals," he said eagerly. "I've been documenting everything. Traditional. Remedies, their applications, results, scientific correlations were identifiable. It's not complete, but it's a foundation we could build upon." Harrington looked impressed. "That's precisely what's needed. With your permission, I'd like Bennett to accompany me to Washington to present this work directly to the department heads. His medical credentials will lend credibility, while his first-hand experience here makes him an ideal advocate." The proposal created a momentary silence around the table. Bennett had become an integral part of their practice. His youthful energy and growing expertise, valuable complements to Eleanor's experience and Grey Wolf's traditional knowledge. His absence would create challenges, yet the opportunity to secure official support for their work couldn't be ignored. "When would you leave?" Eleanor finally asked. "Within the week," Harrington replied. "Winter comes early to these territories. We need to reach the railroad before the heavy snows." Later that night, Eleanor found Bennett sitting alone by the clinic's fireplace, staring into the flames with uncharacteristic stillness. "You're troubled about tomorrow's decision," she observed, settling into the chair opposite him. Bennett nodded, his youthful face solemn in the firelight. "Part of me wants to go to Washington, to fight for what we're doing here. The other part—" He hesitated. "I never expected to find purpose in this place, Miss Blackwood. When I replaced you at White Ridge, I was so confident in my modern training, so certain that youth and recent education trumped experience." He gave a rueful smile. "I couldn't have been more wrong. We all begin with certainty and gradually earn humility," Eleanor replied. "It's the natural progression of wisdom." Grey Wolf said something similar yesterday. Bennett looked up at her. "What do you think I should do?" Eleanor considered carefully before answering. "I think you're uniquely positioned to bridge these worlds. You understand both traditional medicine and modern science in ways neither Grey Wolf nor I can fully achieve. If anyone can persuade Washington of the value of our approach, it's you." Bennett nodded slowly. "And the clinic? Will you manage without me?" "We managed before you arrived," Eleanor reminded him with gentle humor, "though I won't pretend your help hasn't been valuable." His decision came at breakfast the next morning. "I'll go to Washington," he announced, "but with conditions of my own." He turned to Harrington. "I want official recognition of Grey Wolf as a medical authority, not just an informant. And I want Eleanor Blackwood recognized as the founder of this approach, with all the professional status that entails." Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly at the young doctor's boldness, but he nodded. "Those terms seem fair, though I can't promise how the department will respond. Bureaucracy moves at its own pace and has its own prejudices." "Then we'll just have to be persuasive," Bennett replied with newfound confidence. Bennett's departure left a gap in their practice that became especially apparent as winter approached, bringing its usual increase in respiratory ailments and injuries. Eleanor found herself working longer hours, sometimes sleeping on a cot in the clinic when patients needed overnight monitoring. Grey Wolf, too, extended his presence, his quiet efficiency, a constant reassurance during the most challenging cases. The first significant snowfall came in late November, transforming the landscape into a glittering expanse that reminded Eleanor all too vividly of the blizzard that had nearly claimed her life nearly a year earlier. Standing on the clinic's porch one evening, watching frost patterns form on the windows, she found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this place. "Your thoughts are far away," Grey Wolf observed, joining her. with 2 steaming cups of the pine needle tea he brewed each evening. "Not so far," Eleanor replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "Just back to last winter, when everything changed." Grey Wolf followed her gaze to the snowy landscape. "The winter that tried to take your life gave you a new one instead." "Our lives," Eleanor corrected gently. "This clinic is as much your creation as mine." A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind that only develops between people who have moved beyond the need for constant conversation. They had found a balance in their partnership, professional, personal, and somewhere in between, that defied conventional categories. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the stillness. A rider appeared on the trail from the trading post, hunched against the cold and moving with urgency. As he drew closer, Eleanor recognized Charles Running Bear's distinctive silhouette. "Visitors," he called as he reined his horse to a stop before the clinic. "Just arrived at the trading post, asking for you specifically, Eleanor." A flutter of unease passed through her. Who would be traveling in this weather looking for me? Charles's expression was unreadable in the fading light. "Better see for yourself. I've offered them dinner while you decide whether to receive them." Curiosity overcoming caution, Eleanor exchanged a glance with Grey Wolf, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Together, they followed Charles back to the trading post, where warm light spilled from windows frosted with ice crystals. Inside, seated at the long table with cups of Margaret's strong coffee before them, were 3 people Eleanor had never expected to see again: Thomas Wyatt, Councilman Porter, and Martha Peterson, the woman whose illness had been Eleanor's final case. In Whiteridge Creek, the silence that greeted her entrance was profound. Wyatt, who had once dismissed her as too old to serve the growing settlement, now looked older himself, his beard streaked with more grey than she remembered, deep lines etched around his eyes. "Miss Blackwood," he said, rising awkwardly. "We hardly dared hope the rumors were true, that you had survived." Eleanor remained in the doorway, suddenly conscious of how much she had changed from the woman who had left Whiteridge. Her hair, once kept severely pinned, now hung in a single braid down her back. Her clothing combined settler practicality with Lakota influences. A deerskin vest embroidered with traditional patterns worn over her familiar calico dress. But the greatest changes were invisible: a newfound confidence, a deeper understanding of healing, and a sense of purpose stronger than anything she had known before. "As you can see, Mr. Wyatt, reports of my death were greatly exaggerated." She kept her tone neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile. Martha Peterson stepped forward, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We thought we'd lost you in that storm," she said, "after everything you did for us, for me, the way the council treated you." She glanced accusingly at Wyatt. It was shameful. Porter cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We've come to make amends, Miss Blackwood, and to ask for your help, my help." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, aware of Grey Wolf's silent presence at her shoulder. Wyatt nodded grimly. "Whiteridge is in trouble. Dr. Bennett did his best after the influenza, but he left months ago. We heard he'd come looking for you." He paused, gathering himself. "We have no doctor now, no nurse. The nearest medical help is 2 days' ride, and winter's closing in. There are children sick, elderly failing. We need someone who knows frontier medicine." The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor. The same council that had once deemed her too old and outdated now sought her expertise precisely because of her experience. Part of her wanted to refuse them outright, to let them face the consequences of their earlier decision. But another part, the healer who had devoted her life to easing suffering, couldn't dismiss genuine need so easily. "I have commitments here," she said carefully. "Patients who depend on the clinic Grey Wolf and I have established. I can't simply abandon them because Whiteridge has reconsidered my value." Wyatt's face fell, but Martha stepped forward determinedly. "We're not asking you to leave your work here permanently," she clarified. "We're asking if you might come for a time, teach some of our people what you know, help us through this winter." Her gaze took in Grey Wolf with curious respect. "Perhaps bring your colleague if he's willing. Show us this combined approach we've heard about." The request stunned Eleanor into momentary silence. This wasn't just an appeal for emergency help. It was an acknowledgement of the very approach to medicine that Whiteridge had implicitly rejected along with her. She glanced at Grey Wolf, whose impassive expression revealed nothing of his thoughts to anyone who didn't know him well. But Eleanor had learned to read the subtle signs, the slight tilt of his head indicating consideration rather than dismissal. "This would not be a simple matter," she finally replied. "Grey Wolf is a Lakota medicine man. His presence in Whiteridge would require respect and acceptance, not reluctant tolerance." "We understand," Wyatt said, humility evident in his voice. "We're prepared to welcome any help, on whatever terms you set." Charles, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "Winter travel is dangerous. If you're considering this, you should decide quickly before the passes fill with snow." Eleanor felt the weight of multiple responsibilities. To her patients at the clinic, to the community she and Grey Wolf had built, to the people of Whiteridge who had once cast her out but now needed her. She needed time to consider, to consult. "With Grey Wolf privately. We'll give you our answer in the morning," she said. "For now, you're welcome to stay at the trading post." Later, sitting before the fire in the clinic's main room, Eleanor and Grey Wolf discussed the unexpected proposal. The firelight cast their shadows on the log walls, merging and separating as they moved, much like the traditions they had woven together. "They cast you out into the snow to die," Grey Wolf observed, his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "Now they ask you to save them." "People often value what they've lost more than what they have," Eleanor replied. "I can't pretend I don't feel some satisfaction in their recognition, however belated." She paused, arranging her thoughts. "But this isn't about vindication. It's about healing, not just bodies, but perhaps a community." Grey Wolf nodded slowly. "The young doctor, Bennett, spoke of training others in our ways. Perhaps this is where such training begins." Eleanor considered this perspective. "You would be willing to come to Whiteridge, to face the suspicion, perhaps even hostility, of a settler community." "I have faced such things before," Grey Wolf said simply. "Fear comes from ignorance. Sometimes, to combat ignorance, one must step into its territory." His wisdom, as always, cut to the heart of the matter. This opportunity represented more than personal redemption for Eleanor. It was a chance to extend the bridge they had built between medical traditions, to demonstrate that combining approaches saved lives more effectively than rigid adherence to either alone. "We would need to arrange care for our patients here," Eleanor mused, already considering the practical aspects. "Perhaps Charles and Margaret could help with basic needs, and we could return regularly for more complex cases." "Samuel will arrive next week with supplies," Grey Wolf added. "He could spread word about our temporary absence and direct urgent cases to the agency doctor when necessary." As they worked through the logistics, Eleanor felt a growing certainty about their decision. This journey would bring challenges, yet it also offered an opportunity to expand their influence beyond the clinic's immediate surroundings. Whiteridge Creek, the community that had once rejected her, might become the unlikely proving ground for their integrated approach to medicine. Morning brought clarity and resolve. When Eleanor and Grey Wolf met with the Whiteridge delegation at the trading post, their decision was firm. "We will come to Whiteridge for the winter," Eleanor announced. "Not permanently, but to train willing individuals in our approach and help establish practices that will serve the community after we leave." She glanced at Grey Wolf, who stood tall beside her, his dignity undiminished by the prospect of entering a potentially hostile settlement. "We come together, or not at all?" Relief washed over Wyatt's face. "Thank you," he said simply. "Whiteridge will be grateful and respectful," he added, with a meaningful glance at Grey Wolf. Martha stepped forward, taking Eleanor's hands in her own. "I always knew you'd return someday," she said softly, "though I never imagined the circumstances." Eleanor smiled at her former patient and friend. "Neither did I," she admitted, "but life has a way of taking unexpected turns." As preparations for the journey began, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the elegant symmetry of their situation. The blizzard that had seemed to end her medical career had instead transformed it into something richer and more meaningful. Cast out by her community for being too old, she had found wisdom and purpose precisely because of her maturity and experience. And now she would return not as a supplicant seeking reinstatement, but as a pioneer of an approach to medicine that transcended cultural boundaries. Grey Wolf, sensing her thoughts as he often did, paused in his packing of medicinal herbs. "The circle completes itself," he observed. "The ending becomes the beginning." Eleanor nodded, understanding the profound truth in his words. What had once appeared to be rejection had become the gateway to a new chapter, not just for her, but potentially for frontier medicine itself. Together, she and Grey Wolf would carry their vision back to Whiteridge Creek, healing bodies, while perhaps also mending the divide between two worlds that had too long remained separate. As the first light of dawn broke over the eastern horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of rose and gold, Eleanor Blackwood recognized that her journey had never really been about proving her worth to those who had dismissed her. It had been about discovering a deeper purpose, one that honored experience, embraced wisdom from unexpected sources, and recognized that true healing transcended the artificial boundaries humans so often erected between themselves. The old frontier nurse who had been left to die in a blizzard had not only survived, but thrived, transformed by her encounter with a Lakota medicine man into something neither of them could have become alone. A bridge between worlds, a vessel for ancient wisdom meeting modern knowledge, and living proof that sometimes what appears to be an ending is merely the first step on a remarkable new path. The journey to Whiteridge Creek took 5 days through increasingly difficult conditions. Snow had blanketed the territory, transforming familiar landscapes into ethereal terrains of white drifts and ice-glazed trees. The party traveled in 2 wagons, Wyatt and Porter leading in the first, with Eleanor, Grey Wolf, and Martha following. In the second, which had been modified to transport their essential medical supplies, each night, as they camped beneath star-filled skies, Eleanor found herself drawing closer to the moment of return she had never anticipated. What would it feel like to enter Whiteridge again? Not as the settlement's reliable nurse, nor as a scorned outcast, but as something entirely new, a healer transformed by her experiences, bringing knowledge that bridged 2 worlds. "You're troubled," Grey Wolf observed on their final evening before reaching Whiteridge. They sat slightly apart from the others, sharing a small fire and a pot of his medicinal tea. Eleanor watched the flames dance against the darkness. "Not troubled," she corrected, "just contemplating how life circles back in unexpected ways." Grey Wolf nodded, his weathered face serene in the firelight. "The Lakota say that life is not a straight line but a hoop. What seems like an ending often leads back to a beginning." "And what do the Lakota say about forgiveness?" Eleanor asked softly. "These people let me walk into a blizzard to die. Even if they didn't intend that outcome, they risked my life through carelessness and prejudice." Grey Wolf was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Forgiveness is not about erasing what was done," he finally said. "It is about choosing to carry a lighter burden. The question is not whether they deserve forgiveness, but whether you wish to continue carrying the weight of what happened. His wisdom, as always, struck directly at the heart of Eleanor's dilemma. She had built a new life beyond Whiteridge, one with purpose, respect, and genuine partnership. Did she need the settlement's acknowledgement of their error to validate that journey? "You're right," she admitted. "I've been focusing too much on vindicating my past and not enough on the work before us." Grey Wolf's mouth curved in the subtle smile she had come to recognize as approval. "The best revenge is to teach them a better way." The following morning brought them within sight of Whiteridge Creek. Eleanor felt her heart quicken as the settlement's outline emerged from the snowy landscape. In the year since her departure, changes were evident even from a distance. New buildings had appeared, and the promised railroad now cut a dark line through the white terrain to the east. As their wagons approached the main street, figures emerged from buildings, gathering to witness their arrival. Eleanor sat straighter beside Martha, conscious of curious eyes examining not just her return but her appearance. The blend of settler and Lakota influences in her clothing, the confidence in her posture that had replaced the defensive dignity she once maintained. Most striking, however, was the reaction to Grey Wolf. Mothers pulled children closer, men's hands drifted toward weapons, and hushed conversations erupted as the medicine man's presence registered. Despite Wyatt's assurances, the settlement clearly remained unprepared for a Lakota healer in their midst. Wyatt's wagon halted before the town meeting hall, the very building that had once housed Eleanor's small clinic. Their wagon stopped behind it, and for a moment no one moved. Then Martha broke the tension, climbing down and offering her hand first to Eleanor, then, with deliberate respect, to Grey Wolf. "Welcome to Whiteridge Creek," she announced loudly. "Enough for all to hear. Our settlement is honored to receive two such distinguished healers." Her words and actions, a respected community member treating Grey Wolf as an honored guest rather than a threat, created a subtle shift in the atmosphere. While suspicion remained evident in many faces, open hostility receded slightly. Wyatt stepped forward. "We've prepared the old McIntyre place for your use," he told Eleanor. "It has room for both living quarters and a clinic space." Eleanor nodded, recognizing the name. The McIntyre cabin was one of the settlement's larger structures, built by a prosperous rancher who had moved further west the previous year. Its location at the edge of town would provide both privacy and accessibility, and, she noted silently, keep Grey Wolf somewhat separated from those most likely to object to his presence. "We'll need to unload our supplies and establish the clinic." "Immediately," she replied. "I understand there are already patients requiring attention. Several children with persistent coughs, 2 cases of frostbite, and Old Man Collins's rheumatism is worse than ever," Martha supplied. "Plus, Jenny Miller's time is near, her first baby." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Grey Wolf, who inclined his head slightly. The work would begin immediately, leaving little time for the settlement to debate the wisdom of their presence. The McIntyre cabin proved better than expected, spacious by frontier standards, with a large main room ideal for a clinic and 2 smaller rooms that would serve as their private quarters. Most promising was the attached shed, which, after cleaning, would make an excellent space for Grey Wolf to prepare traditional remedies away from curious or judgmental eyes. They worked efficiently to transform the space, falling into the practiced routines they had developed at their original clinic. By nightfall, examining tables, medicine shelves, and treatment areas were established. Grey Wolf had organized his herbs and preparations in the shed, while Eleanor arranged her surgical instruments and modern medicines within easy reach. Their first patients arrived before they had finished. A mother with 2 feverish children, bundled against the cold and clearly hesitant as she noticed Grey Wolf sorting dried plants by the fire. Eleanor welcomed them warmly, performing thorough examinations while Grey Wolf continued his work, his presence a quiet but undeniable statement that their practice involved both traditions. "They have chest infections," Eleanor explained to the worried mother, "not serious yet, but requiring immediate treatment to prevent worsening." The woman, Sarah Jenkins, whose youngest Eleanor had delivered before her departure, glanced uncertainly between the two healers. "Dr. Bennett used to give them syrups from his medicine chest, and those have their place," Eleanor acknowledged. "But first, I'd like to try something that may work more gently." She nodded to Grey Wolf, who approached with a small pot of aromatic salve. "This opens breathing passages," he explained in his deep, accented English, "and fights the sickness without upsetting the stomach." Sarah's expression registered doubt, but when Eleanor applied the salve to both children's chests and back, the effect was almost immediate. Their labored breathing eased, and the elder child's persistent cough subsided. "What is it?" Sarah asked, amazement overcoming her initial suspicion. "A combination of pine resin, mint, and several herbs that grow only in high elevations," Eleanor explained. "Grey Wolf taught me its preparation during my time with the Lakota." The mother's gaze shifted to Grey Wolf with new consideration. "Thank you," she said simply. That first interaction established a pattern that would repeat throughout the following days as word spread through Whiteridge. Initial wariness gave way to cautious acceptance as practical results overcame prejudice. Parents whose children found relief, elderly settlers whose chronic pains diminished, and pregnant women benefiting from prenatal care that combined scientific understanding with generations of indigenous wisdom, all became unwitting ambassadors for the unusual healing partnership. Not everyone embraced their approach, of course. Reverend Taylor, the settlement's recently arrived minister, made his disapproval evident during his first visit to the clinic. "Pagan practices have no place in Christian healing," he declared after observing Grey Wolf preparing a poultice for a patient with inflammatory arthritis. "Medicine is one thing, Miss Blackwood, but inviting spiritual confusion is quite another." Eleanor's response was measured but firm. "We treat bodies, Reverend, not souls." Grey Wolf's knowledge of plant medicine has been accumulated over generations, knowledge that works regardless of one's spiritual beliefs. She gestured toward the patient, whose pain-etched face had relaxed as the poultice took effect. "Would you deny this man relief because you disagree with its source?" The minister had no immediate answer, though his subsequent sermons reportedly included warnings against foreign influences that threatened the settlement's moral foundation. More concerning than religious objection was the arrival of 3 men from the territorial capital, representatives of mining interests who viewed Grey Wolf's presence in Whiteridge as an unwelcome reminder of Lakota claims to lands they hoped to exploit. Their leader, a sharp-featured man named Harkins, confronted Wyatt publicly in the settlement's small saloon. "You've invited an Indian into a white settlement," he accused loudly enough for all to hear. "Next, you'll be acknowledging their ridiculous claims to the Black Hills." "We've invited a healer to help our sick," Wyatt countered, his initial discomfort, with Grey Wolf's presence having evolved into grudging respect over the weeks of working together. "And the hills aren't our concern. They're well beyond our territory." "Everything in the Dakota Territory is our concern," Harkins insisted. "Gold doesn't care about imaginary boundaries." The confrontation remained verbal, but its implications troubled Eleanor deeply. When she shared the incident with Grey Wolf that evening, his calm acceptance surprised her. "Such men have always existed," he observed. "They see land as something to possess, not as a relative to be respected. Their threats are like wind through empty branches, loud but signifying little." "I worry about your safety," Eleanor admitted. Whiteridge is accepting our medical help, but that doesn't mean all its residents have abandoned their prejudices. Grey Wolf's expression softened. Your concern honors me, Healer Eleanor. But I have walked dangerous paths before. The work we do here matters more than the risk. That work continued to expand as winter deepened. Beyond treating immediate illnesses and injuries, Eleanor and Grey Wolf began implementing the training program they had promised, teaching interested residents the basics of both medical traditions. Martha Peterson showed particular aptitude, her natural intelligence complemented by genuine interest in the combined approach. You have healer's hands, Grey Wolf told her after observing her preparation of a complex herbal remedy. Steady and patient. Martha's face flushed with pleasure at the rare compliment. I never imagined myself in such a role, she confessed. Women in Whiteridge are expected to focus on home and family. The greatest healers I've known have been women, Grey Wolf replied. In my tribe, many medicine people are female. They understand the balance of life better than most men. Eleanor, overhearing this exchange while inventorying supplies, smiled to herself. Martha was not the only Whiteridge resident discovering new possibilities through their presence. Young Sarah Williams had begun assisting with childbirths, demonstrating remarkable calm during even difficult deliveries. Timothy Jenkins, considered slow by many in the settlement, showed an uncanny ability to identify medicinal plants under Grey Wolf's tutelage. These small transformations within the community paralleled the larger changes in attitudes toward their integrated medical approach. By mid-January, the clinic regularly served 20 or more patients daily, with settlers traveling from outlying homesteads specifically to consult the nurse and the Indian healer about ailments that had resisted conventional treatments. The territorial newspaper even sent a reporter to document the unusual partnership, resulting in a surprisingly balanced article titled "Frontier Medicine Finds New Path." Eleanor kept a copy folded in her journal, both as validation of their work and as evidence for Bennett to use in his ongoing negotiations in Washington. A letter from the young doctor arrived in late January, carried by a traveling postal rider, who had braved difficult conditions to reach the isolated communities. Bennett reported promising developments. Several officials had expressed interest in their approach, particularly after an influenza outbreak in another territory had proven deadly despite conventional medical interventions. They're beginning to recognize that frontier conditions require flexible approaches, he wrote. Grey Wolf's methods for respiratory treatments have generated particular interest, as has your surgical technique for treating arrow and bullet wounds. With continued documentation and results, official sanction seems increasingly likely. The letter's most surprising news, however, came in its final paragraph. Dr. Harrington has proposed establishing a formal frontier medical service that would implement your combined approach throughout the territories. He suggests you would be the natural choice for its director, with Grey Wolf as chief consultant on traditional methods. I believe such a position would finally afford both of you the professional recognition your work deserves. Eleanor read this passage aloud to Grey Wolf as they sat by the cabin's fire after a particularly demanding day. His response was characteristically measured. Such recognition would benefit our work, he acknowledged. But titles mean little compared to helping those in need. True, Eleanor agreed, but official status would protect you from men like Harkins, and it would ensure that what we've built survives beyond our personal efforts. Grey Wolf gazed into the flames, his expression thoughtful. The white man's government changes direction like prairie grass in the wind. Today they may value our knowledge. Tomorrow they may again call it primitive. Then we must create something sturdy enough to withstand changing winds, Eleanor replied with sudden conviction. Not just a service, but a school. a place where both traditions are taught as equally valuable parts of frontier medicine. The idea crystallized as she spoke, a vision of a permanent institution where young doctors like Bennett could learn from experienced nurses like herself and traditional healers like Grey Wolf, where neither age nor cultural background determined one's value, but rather the wisdom and skills one brought to the healing arts. A school requires land, buildings, resources, Grey Wolf observed, though his eyes had brightened with interest. All of which the government might provide if convinced of its value, Eleanor countered. Bennett and Harrington are already making progress if we document our successes here in Whiteridge. Their conversation continued late into the night, the seed of a new possibility taking root alongside their existing work. By morning, Eleanor had drafted a detailed proposal, not just for a frontier medical service, but for an accompanying training institute that would ensure its approach endured. February brought both the winter's deepest cold and its greatest challenges. A particularly vicious storm isolated Whiteridge for nearly a week, during which supplies dwindled and illness spread through the close quarters where families had huddled for warmth. Eleanor and Grey Wolf worked almost without rest, moving between homes when patients couldn't reach the clinic, combining their knowledge to combat fevers, frostbite, and the pervasive respiratory ailments that threatened the very young and very old. Their most difficult case arrived in the storm's aftermath. A trapper found half frozen in his remote cabin by neighbors checking on outlying homesteads. The man's feet and hands showed advanced frostbite, and pneumonia had settled deep in his lungs. By conventional medicine, we would need to amputate both feet and possibly several fingers, Eleanor explained to the settlement council that had gathered in the clinic. But Grey Wolf has suggested an alternative approach. Grey Wolf stepped forward, his dignity silencing even those councilmen who had initially opposed his presence. The damage is severe but not complete, he explained. With proper treatment, circulation may return to most of the affected areas. His proposed treatment combined willow bark extract for pain and inflammation, specialized hot and cold therapies to stimulate blood flow, and poultices of particular herbs that had shown remarkable efficacy in preventing the spread of dead tissue. Eleanor would monitor for infection and provide surgical intervention only if absolutely necessary. The council's approval of this approach, without debate or objection, marked a subtle but significant shift in Whiteridge's relationship with the Lakota healer. No longer was he viewed as Eleanor's unusual assistant or a temporary necessity. He had become a respected medical authority in his own right. The trapper's treatment extended through February and into early March, requiring daily attention and meticulous care. To everyone's amazement, including Eleanor's, the man retained all but 2 toes and the tip of 1 finger, far less loss than conventional amputation would have required. His recovery became something of a sensation, with visitors from neighboring settlements arriving specifically to witness the miracle of the combined approach. As winter's grip began to loosen, bringing the first hints of spring thaw, Eleanor and Grey Wolf found themselves at another crossroads. Their temporary commitment to Whiteridge had extended longer than originally planned, while their clinic near the trading post awaited their return. The proposed frontier medical service remained in bureaucratic limbo in Washington, with Bennett's letters expressing both optimism about eventual approval and frustration with delays. "Whiteridge wants us to stay permanently," Eleanor noted, as she and Grey Wolf took a rare moment of leisure walking along the settlement's outskirts, where crocuses had begun pushing through melting snow. Wyatt offered to build a proper medical building if we commit to establishing our practice here. Grey Wolf nodded, unsurprised. They have seen the value of our medicine. This is good. He paused, studying the distant horizon where the plains met the sky. But our path may lead elsewhere. Eleanor followed his gaze, understanding the unspoken, a sentiment. While Whiteridge had largely overcome its initial rejection of both her experience and Grey Wolf's traditional knowledge, it remained at heart a settler community with the attendant limitations. Their vision for truly integrated medicine might require more neutral ground. "I've been thinking about Samuel's last visit," she said after a moment. "His mention of the railroad junction being established near the territorial border, a place where multiple communities, settlers, Lakota and others, naturally converge." Grey Wolf's expression lightened with interest. A crossroads, exactly, not belonging exclusively to any one community, but accessible to all. Eleanor's excitement grew as she articulated the idea that had been forming in her mind. "If the Frontier Medical Service is approved, we could propose that location for its headquarters and training facility, a literal and figurative meeting point between traditions." As they continued their walk, plans flowed between them with the ease of long partnership: how the facility might be structured, what training would entail, how to balance government support with the independence necessary to maintain their unorthodox approach. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of wagon wheels and hoofbeats, unusual traffic for the still muddy spring trails. Returning to the main street, they found the settlement in a flurry of activity as riders and wagons arrived from the east. Samuel's familiar figure appeared at the head of the small caravan, alongside a man Eleanor recognized with surprise as Dr. Harrington, the government inspector who had visited their original clinic. Behind them came Bennett, looking more mature than when he had departed months earlier, and several official-looking individuals Eleanor didn't recognize. "They've approved it," Bennett called as he spotted Eleanor and Grey Wolf. "The Frontier Medical Service. It's been authorized at the highest levels." As the travelers dismounted, Harrington approached with an envelope bearing official seals. "Miss Blackwood, Grey Wolf," he greeted them formally, "I bring official recognition from the Department of Indian Affairs and the Territorial Medical Board for your integrated approach to frontier medicine." The document he presented contained formal language establishing the service Eleanor and Bennett had proposed, with specific provisions recognizing both scientific medicine and traditional indigenous healing practices as essential components. Most surprisingly, it designated Eleanor as director and Grey Wolf as chief medical consultant, with authority to establish training protocols combining both traditions. "This is unprecedented," Harrington acknowledged as Eleanor and Grey Wolf absorbed the implications. "It required considerable negotiation and no small amount of political maneuvering, but the results you've demonstrated, both here and at your original clinic, proved persuasive." The final pages outlined the proposed location, precisely the railroad junction Eleanor had mentioned during their walk, and authorized substantial resources for establishing both treatment facilities and training programs. As news spread through Whiteridge, reactions ranged from pride that their community had hosted such groundbreaking work to concern about losing the medical care they had come to depend upon. Wyatt, showing the leadership that had been lacking during Eleanor's previous tenure, called a town meeting to address these concerns directly. "Whiteridge Creek rejected Miss Blackwood a year ago because we thought her too old, her methods outdated," he stated bluntly to the assembled settlers. "That mistake nearly cost her life and certainly cost our community dearly during the influenza outbreak. Now the territorial government recognizes what we failed to see, that experience and wisdom, whether from our traditions or those of the Lakota people, have immense value." He turned to Eleanor and Grey Wolf, who stood together at the edge of the gathering. "We hope you'll continue to consider Whiteridge part of your practice, even as you establish this larger service. We've learned our lesson about judging worth based on age or background." Eleanor surveyed the faces before her, people who had once dismissed her, then desperately needed her and finally came to respect her. Her journey had come full circle, yet that circle had expanded to encompass possibilities she could never have imagined when she walked into that blizzard a year earlier. "Whiteridge will always hold a special place in our work," she assured them. "We'll establish regular visits as part of the service's circuit, and Martha and Sarah will continue the training we've begun, serving as our representatives between visits." As the meeting concluded and plans took shape for their departure to the junction site, Eleanor found herself drawn to the edge of town, to the specific trail she had followed into the blizzard that had nearly claimed her life. The path that had seemed an ending had proven to be a beginning instead. Grey Wolf joined her silently, his presence a reminder of how profoundly that single event had altered both their lives. The too old frontier nurse and the Lakota medicine man, rejected by their respective societies, yet finding in that rejection the seeds of something revolutionary. "The circle completes itself," Grey Wolf observed, echoing words he had spoken months earlier, "but it also expands." Eleanor nodded, watching the sun set over the prairie that had nearly become her final resting place. From nearly dying in a blizzard to directing a medical service, life takes unexpected trails. Grey Wolf's weathered face creased in one of his rare smiles. "The strongest medicines often come from the most bitter plants," he replied, "and the greatest healers are often those who have known deep wounds themselves." As twilight softened the landscape, Eleanor Blackwood contemplated the extraordinary journey that had transformed rejection into purpose, age into advantage, and cultural differences into complementary strengths. The frontier medical service would face challenges ahead: prejudice, bureaucracy, resistance to change, but its foundation rested on something more enduring than any opposition: the simple truth that healing transcended artificial boundaries, and wisdom could be found in the most unexpected places. The too old frontier nurse, who had been left to die in a blizzard, had not only survived, but thrived, finding in a Lakota medicine man not just a rescuer, but a partner in pioneering a new approach to frontier medicine, one that honored experience, respected traditional knowledge, and recognized that sometimes the most valuable wisdom comes from those society is quickest to dismiss. The railroad junction that would house the Frontier Medical Service headquarters was little more than a dusty crossroads when Eleanor and Grey Wolf first arrived in late April. The newly laid tracks gleamed in the spring sunshine, intersecting amid a scatter of hastily constructed buildings: a station house, a general store, a small hotel, and several warehouses. Prairie stretched in all directions, dotted with wildflowers that painted the landscape in splashes of yellow, purple, and white. "Not much to look at yet," Samuel observed, as he helped unload supplies from the wagons that had transported their medical equipment from Whiteridge. "But the railroad brings change faster than spring floods. This junction will be a proper town." Before the year's end, Eleanor surveyed the site with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The government had allocated land on the north side of the tracks, 5 acres, with a small existing structure that had once served as a maintenance shed for the railroad construction crew. It was a humble beginning for their ambitious vision. "Space to grow," Grey Wolf commented, seeming to read her thoughts as he often did. "Better to build slowly with strong foundations than quickly with weak ones." Dr. Harrington, who had accompanied them to oversee the official establishment of the service, approached with a rolled blueprint tucked under his arm. "The architects have prepared preliminary designs based on your specifications," he announced. "Construction crews will arrive next week to begin work on the main building." The plans, when spread on an improvised table outside the maintenance shed, revealed a thoughtful integration of Eleanor and Grey Wolf's ideas: a central treatment facility with separate wings for acute care and recovery, surrounded by smaller structures for specialized purposes. One building was designated specifically for teaching, another for research and preparation of medicines, and a third for housing visiting practitioners and students. Most striking to Eleanor was a circular structure at the heart of the complex, an open-air pavilion combining elements of traditional Lakota medicine, lodges with practical features from Western medical facilities. "The healing circle," Grey Wolf murmured, tracing the design with weathered fingers, "where traditions meet as equals." Construction began with the arrival of materials and workers on the eastbound train. The project attracted attention beyond what its immediate scope might warrant. Newspapers from as far as Chicago sent reporters to document the unprecedented government recognition of Indian medicine. Politicians made appearances, some genuinely supportive of the integrative approach, others clearly seeking to associate themselves with a novel government initiative. Through it all, Eleanor and Grey Wolf maintained their focus on establishing a functional medical practice. They converted the maintenance shed into a temporary clinic, treating patients while the permanent facilities took shape around them. Word spread quickly among both settler communities and native populations that the renowned partnership was now operating at the junction, drawing a steady stream of those seeking care. Among their first visitors was a Lakota delegation from the reservation, led by Running Elk, who had visited Grey Wolf's lodge during Eleanor's initial recovery. He arrived with his wife and several tribal elders, their interest in the service clearly tempered with cautious skepticism. "You build with government money," Running Elk observed after touring the construction site. "The same government that restricts our movement, denies our medicine, places our children in schools that forbid our language." Eleanor nodded, acknowledging the legitimate concern. "We do," she replied honestly, "and we recognize the contradiction, but we've secured written guarantees of autonomy in our medical practices and teaching methods. This service will preserve traditional knowledge, not suppress it." Grey Wolf, who had been listening silently, addressed the elders in Lakota. Eleanor had learned enough of the language during their time together to follow his explanation of how the service would function, as a bridge between worlds rather than a replacement of one by another. The eldest of the visitors, a woman whose face bore the deep lines of nearly a century of life, finally spoke. "My grandmother was a healer before the white man came," she said through Running Elk's translation. "She taught that true medicine flows from many sources, like streams joining to form a river. If you honor this teaching in your work here, we will support it." Her approval marked a crucial acceptance from the Lakota community. By the time the delegation departed, they had agreed to send 2 apprentice healers to learn and share knowledge once the teaching facilities were completed. Similar diplomatic efforts with settler communities proved equally essential. Eleanor traveled to surrounding towns, meeting with local doctors and community leaders to explain the service's purpose and extend invitations for collaboration. Some rejected the concept outright, unwilling to consider native medicine as anything but primitive superstition. Others, particularly younger physicians who had struggled with frontier conditions, showed genuine interest in expanding their therapeutic options. Dr. Bennett proved invaluable during this period, having developed considerable political acumen during his time in Washington. He navigated the complex relationships between territorial authorities, military officers, and indigenous leaders with surprising skill for one so young, smoothing paths that might otherwise have presented insurmountable obstacles. "You've matured since White Ridge," Eleanor observed one evening as they reviewed progress on the growing facility, "not just as a physician, but as a diplomat." Bennett smiled ruefully. "Necessity is an effective teacher. When officials dismissed our proposal because it came from an aging nurse and a savage, I learned quickly that medical evidence alone wouldn't suffice. Politics required different skills. By midsummer, the main treatment building was completed, allowing them to move operations from the cramped maintenance shed to proper facilities. The timing proved fortunate, as a measles outbreak in a nearby settlement created their first medical crisis under the service's official banner. Eleanor and Grey Wolf mobilized immediately, implementing isolation protocols while preparing traditional remedies that Grey Wolf had found effective in reducing fever and preventing the respiratory complications that often proved fatal in measles cases. These were combined with conventional supportive care, creating a treatment approach that drew from both traditions' strengths. To Eleanor's quiet satisfaction, the results spoke eloquently of their method's validity, while neighboring communities, struggling with the same outbreak, reported mortality rates of 15 to 20%. Patients treated at the service experienced a rate below 5%. The difference was particularly pronounced among children, whose reactions to Grey Wolf's fever-reducing preparations were remarkably positive compared to conventional methods alone. Dr. Harrington, returning for an official inspection in August, brought news that these results had generated significant interest in medical circles back east. The American Medical Association has requested a formal presentation on your integrative approach, he informed them as they toured the nearly completed complex. There's growing recognition that frontier conditions require innovative solutions. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Grey Wolf, both recognizing the irony. What had begun as necessity, a frontier nurse abandoned in a blizzard, rescued by a Lakota medicine man, had evolved into an approach that the medical establishment now deemed worthy of serious consideration. "Will you go?" Harrington asked, noting their silent communication. "Perhaps Bennett should represent us," Eleanor suggested. "He speaks their language, literally and figuratively." Grey Wolf nodded agreement. "Our work is here, among those who need healing. Words in distant cities matter less than actions where suffering exists." As autumn approaches, bringing golden light and cooling breezes to the prairie, the Frontier Medical Service stood nearly complete. The teaching pavilion hosted its first formal class in September, a diverse group including 2 young doctors from territorial outposts, 3 Lakota apprentice healers, a midwife from a Norwegian settler community, and Martha Peterson, who had traveled from White Ridge to continue her training. Eleanor found profound satisfaction in these teaching sessions, which alternated between her instruction in anatomy, surgical techniques, and disease recognition, and Grey Wolf's detailed explanations of traditional remedies, their preparation, and appropriate applications. The students initially segregated themselves, skepticism evident in their interactions, but gradually formed a cohesive group as they witnessed the effectiveness of the combined approach. "You've created something remarkable here," Dr. Harrington commented during the harvest moon when he returned with a delegation of government officials. "A true marriage of traditions that respects both while creating something greater than either alone." Eleanor smiled at his characterization, but shook her head slightly. "We haven't married the traditions so much as allowed them to converse as equals. Each has wisdom the other lacks." The officials departed impressed, leaving behind promises of continued funding and expanded authority. The Frontier Medical Service was to become a model for similar installations throughout the Western Territories, a network of facilities where scientific and traditional approaches could complement rather than combat each other. As the first snow dusted the prairie in early November, Eleanor found herself drawn to the healing circle at the complex's heart. The open-air pavilion had been constructed according to Grey Wolf's specifications, with a central fire pit surrounded by concentric rings of seating. Its roof remained open at the center, allowing smoke to rise directly to the sky, while also admitting sunlight during the day and revealing stars at night. She sat on one of the stone benches, remembering the blizzard that had nearly claimed her life 2 years earlier. The anniversary approached, that fateful day when Whiteridge Creek had deemed her too old and sent her into the storm. How strange that their rejection had led her here, to an achievement she could never have imagined while serving as the settlement's nurse. "The season turns again," Grey Wolf observed, joining her quietly. "Your thoughts walk in the past." Eleanor nodded, watching snowflakes drift through the pavilion's central opening. "I was thinking about how endings become beginnings, how Whiteridge's rejection led to all of this." She gestured toward the surrounding complex. "They thought my age made me less valuable. They couldn't see that experience was exactly what frontier medicine needed. The young often mistake newness for improvement," Grey Wolf replied, settling beside her. "My people have always honored elders for their wisdom. A sapling may grow straight and tall, but it breaks in storms that mature trees withstand." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow accumulate on the ground beyond the pavilion's edge, while the central fire kept its interior warm. The contrast struck Eleanor as symbolic of their entire enterprise, creating a protected space where healing could flourish amid harsh conditions. Their contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of a rider, his horse's hooves muffled by the fresh snow. The man, bundled against the cold, dismounted awkwardly and approached the pavilion with urgency in his stride. "Nurse Blackwood," he called. "Medicine man Grey Wolf? We need help at Clearwater Station. Train derailment with many injured." They moved with practiced efficiency, gathering the emergency supplies they had prepared for such contingencies. Within 20 minutes, they had loaded a wagon with medical necessities and were heading toward Clearwater, 10 miles west along the railroad line. Dr. Bennett and 2 of the more advanced students accompanied them, creating a mobile unit of the Frontier Medical Service's best resources. The scene at Clearwater was chaos-contained. 2 passenger cars had left the tracks when a section of rail fractured in the cold. Injured travelers huddled in the station house and a nearby church, their conditions ranging from minor cuts to life-threatening injuries. Eleanor assessed the situation with the calm efficiency that had become her hallmark. "Bennett, take the head injuries in the station house. Martha, assist him and manage the less severe cases. Grey Wolf and I will handle the critical injuries in the church." The next hours blurred into a symphony of coordinated care as they worked to stabilize the injured. Eleanor performed emergency surgery on a man with internal bleeding, while Grey Wolf prepared pain-relieving tinctures that allowed treatment without the disorientation of conventional sedatives. Together, they set broken bones, closed wounds, and monitored those at greatest risk. By dawn, the crisis had stabilized. A relief train from the junction arrived with additional medical personnel and supplies, allowing Eleanor and Grey Wolf to focus on the most critical patients who would be transported to their facility. As they supervised the loading of stretchers onto the train, the railroad's regional superintendent approached, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes bright with gratitude. 27 people would have died without your intervention, he said simply. The closest conventional doctor is a full day's journey from here. Eleanor nodded acknowledgement, too tired for lengthy conversation. The service was established. Precisely for situations like this, the frontier creates unique challenges that require immediate response. And unique approaches, the superintendent added, glancing at Grey Wolf, who was administering a final dose of medicine to an elderly passenger. I admit I had doubts about what I'd heard. A white nurse and a Lakota healer running a government-sanctioned medical service. Seemed impossible. He shook his head in wonder. But I've never seen anything like what you accomplished here today. 2 medical traditions, each with valuable knowledge, Eleanor explained. Together they fill gaps that either alone would leave open. As the relief train departed Clearwater with its cargo of injured passengers, Eleanor felt the bone-deep exhaustion that followed such intense medical work, yet alongside the fatigue ran a current of profound satisfaction. The Frontier Medical Service had faced its first major test and proven the validity of its approach beyond any reasonable doubt. During the journey back to the junction, Grey Wolf sat beside her in the wagon, his own weariness evident in the deeper lines around his eyes. "You are thinking again," he observed, his voice rough with fatigue. Eleanor smiled faintly. "About how far we've come. 2 years ago, I was the discarded nurse, too old to be useful. You were the medicine man, whose knowledge settlers dismissed as primitive. Now we've created something that saved 27 lives today." Grey Wolf nodded, his gaze fixed on the snow-covered prairie stretching to the horizon. "The Lakota have a saying, Mitakuye Oyasingi, we are all related. Your medicine and mine, like distant cousins separated long ago, now reunited." The image resonated with Eleanor, not a forced marriage of incompatible approaches, but a recognition of common ancestry and purpose, each tradition bringing unique strengths to a shared mission of healing. As they created a small rise, the buildings of the Frontier Medical Service came into view, smoke rising from chimneys against the pale winter sky. What had begun as a dusty crossroads now bustled with purpose. Medical personnel moving between buildings, students practicing techniques in the teaching pavilion, patients recovering in comfortable quarters rather than struggling alone in isolated homesteads. Eleanor recalled Grey Wolf's words from their first days together in his lodge after he had rescued her from the blizzard. The white man's way, always looking for new things, throwing away what is still good. How true that had proven, not just about her own rejection, but about the broader dismissal of traditional medical knowledge accumulated over centuries. The Frontier Medical Service stood as a deliberate counterpoint to that tendency, a place where age brought respect rather than dismissal, where traditional wisdom complemented rather than competed with scientific advancement, and where healing transcended the artificial boundaries humans so often erected between themselves. As winter settled fully across the Dakota Territory, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a sea of white, reminiscent of that fateful blizzard, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. The too old frontier nurse, left to die in a storm by those who deemed her obsolete, had not only survived but thrived, creating an institution that would endure beyond her lifetime. Working alongside the Lakota medicine man who had saved her life, she had discovered that age was not the liability Whiteridge had claimed, but an asset of immeasurable value in frontier medicine. Experience, wisdom, and the humility to learn from different traditions had proven more powerful than youth's energy or the newest medical techniques alone. On the anniversary of the blizzard that had nearly claimed her life, Eleanor walked to the edge of the medical complex, gazing toward the distant horizon where sky met prairie in a seamless line of white. Grey Wolf joined her silently, his presence a reminder of how profoundly that single event had altered both in their lives. "The elders say that when a snowflake falls, it carries a story," he said after a comfortable silence. "Your story was not finished when the snow tried to claim you." Eleanor smiled, feeling the weight of the journey they had traveled together. "Nor was yours when you found me. Perhaps that's the most important lesson we've learned, that endings are rarely what they seem." As fresh snow began to fall, dusting their shoulders and catching Eleanor's silver hair, they turned back toward the healing circle at the heart of the complex. Students had gathered there for the day's lessons, their diverse faces expectant as they awaited the wisdom of the frontier nurse who had been deemed too old and the Lakota medicine man whose knowledge had been dismissed as primitive. Together, Eleanor Blackwood and Grey Wolf walked toward them, carrying the living proof that sometimes the most powerful healing comes from those societies that are quickest to discard, and that wisdom, like medicine itself, belongs not to any single tradition, but to all who seek to ease suffering with open minds and compassionate hearts. In the heart of the Dakota Territory, where a blizzard had once represented death but ultimately delivered rebirth, the Frontier Medical Service stood as testament to a simple but profound truth: that when traditions respect, rather than reject, each other, when experience is valued rather than discarded, and when healing transcends the boundaries of culture and prejudice, even the most devastating storms can lead to unexpected new beginnings. "The circle completes itself," Grey Wolf said softly as they reached the pavilion's entrance, "and the next journey begins." Eleanor nodded, feeling the rightness of his words as they prepared to share their hard-won wisdom with those who would carry it forward. The two-old frontier nurse and the Lakota medicine man had transformed rejection into purpose, creating a legacy that would endure long after the story of their unlikely partnership had faded into frontier legend. As they stepped into the healing circle to begin the day's teaching, the snow continued to fall, each flake carrying its own story, each journey interconnected with countless others across the vast, unforgiving, yet ultimately beautiful landscape of the American frontier. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.